Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Magnus Carlson just did something that wasn't supposed to be possible. He reached 3,400 ELO. Now, if you're new to chess or you don't know chess at all, that number probably means absolutely nothing to you. But trust me, it is ridiculous. To put that in perspective, the difference between Magnus and the average grandmaster is now larger than the difference between the average chess player and someone who has just learned how to move the pieces. Just think about that for a second. Imagine showing up to a basketball court and discovering that one player is so much better than everyone else that the gap between him and the professionals is larger than you and the professionals themselves. That's essentially what Magnus has done to the chess world. For decades, every time people thought a rating ceiling has been reached, Magnus has crushed it. 3,100, he got there. 3,200, done. 3,300, doesn't even matter. And now, somehow against the strongest players in the world, Magnus Carlsen has become the first player to reach 3,400 ELO. So how did he do it? Was it a single brilliant tournament, a lucky streak, or are we witnessing one of the most dominant stretches of chess ever played? To help you appreciate just how absurd this run has been, Magnus has won 45 of his last 53 games. He's drawn 5 of those games and lost just 3. Now here's where it gets even more ridiculous. At 3,400 ELO, Magnus is so much higher rated than any opponent he plays that he only gains ELO on a draw. Typically, if you were to draw your opponent, you would get 1 or 0 rating points, and you would only go down when you lose. Magnus will lose some 4 to 8 ELO every time he just draws his opponent. Think about that. Most chess players are thrilled to draw a strong opponent. Magnus is so far above the competition that if he doesn't win, his rating goes down. And despite playing under that kind of pressure, he continues to dominate. The craziest part, this isn't even unusual for him. Go through his games over the last few years and you'll see this pattern again and again and again. Tournament after tournament, event after event, Magnus shows up and leaves with another trophy. Imagine being so dominant at something that losing becomes the exception rather than the rule. That's the level Magnus Carlsen is operating at. Today we're going to break down the game's statistics and the absolute insanity behind Magnus Carlsen's climb to 3,400 ELO. Without further ado, let's get right into it. The first game we're going to look at here is going to be the game that actually crossed Magnus Carlsen into the 3,400 ELO rating. Opens with a Indian game, and Magnus decides to push his d-pawn, grab an extra space in the center. Still a book move. We're going to see pretty normal development moves here by both players. Magnus makes a small mistake or inaccuracy. Again, not really an inaccuracy. The computer wants you to pin it to the knight, but that's okay. He's going for these wins, and in order to do that against these players who have played these games over and over and over and over again, sometimes you have to go a little bit out of the ordinary to actually develop any amount of imbalance to create a winning situation. Now, we see some more normal developing moves. Again, a small inaccuracy, nothing too big. And now we get the first pretty great move, forcing the bishop back to g6, where it's just going to be a little bit passive, followed by the pawn push into the center of the board, opening up the scope of his bishop and reinforcing and blocking down the center of the board. Now, not a great move by Christopher. He does bring his knight back to the back rank here, and that is just a little bit too slow. Maybe he's trying to reroute it. Regardless, it is a little bit congesting, we'll say. He has his knights on the back rank. His queen has yet been activated. He has castled, and he does have 2 pieces developed. But Magnus is just 2 moves away from castling and being almost completely done developing. And now Christopher's going to have to redevelop these knights, which is just going to take him a little bit of time. Magnus brings out his bishop, and we get a blunder on move 11. This is just because after takes and the queen takes back, she actually kicked with the pawn, forcing the queen away and kicking the bishop, which actually traps it entirely. Guys, this is move 14, and Magnus is already completely crushing. this is against another super grandmaster, 3200 rated player, and Magnus just makes it look easy. He's like a snake, all coiled up, ready to strike. As soon as he sees a weakness, bow! He strikes, and frankly, there's not much you can do against it. Best move is to take back in the center. Magnus does recapture, gets kicked away from the knight, and just brings it back real easy. Nothing really too crazy to think about here. Pawn push into the center, taking away some of this space from Magnus as compensation. But like you can see with the computer, it is just completely crushing. There's not much Cursor can do at this point. He wants to infiltrate with his knight, attack this really weak pawn, forcing his knight to really stay pretty immobile. He's going to have to develop his knight in some way and probably bring back the rook over. It is defended by the queen, but then again, the queen can't move and the knight can't move. It's just going to be a very congested position for Christopher. Magnus does bring over his knight. They both are just doing a little bit more developing moves, and now we see just the middle game here. Nothing really too special. Brings his queen in to activate it, attacking a whole bunch of pieces. Now this pawn is going to need another defender, or blocked, of course. Now the best move here is going to be taking back with the knight. However, Magnus, very cool, calm, and collected, does offer a queen trade. Very good move as well, because if you get a queen trade in this position with a bishop up, you are just guaranteed to win the game. Of course, Christopher does not accept the queen trade, but he does leave his knight to be captured. Now you see this doubled pawn structure in the center of the board. It's really not too inconvenient, I would say, just because these are actually pretty well supported pawns. They will eventually get knocked down, but it's just going to take a little bit of work. We do see Magnus infiltrate with his queen, which gets immediately kicked away by the rook, protecting his knight, but it does leave a pawn hanging. So now Magnus has a completely passed pawn. Not much you can do there. He's just going to route his rook over some way, one way or another, by castling or by bringing it over. And it's just going to be a slow grind of a game where you're just going to push this pawn and win. Possibly trade off a couple rooks, maybe the queen if you can, but it should just be a pretty over and done game. Christopher does bring over the rook to defend this passed pawn, but Magnus just pushes it. Now it is just going to become a game of defending this pawn and trying to trade off pieces. We do see a queen trade, which is the best move, but now, like I said, after that queen trade, it's just a pretty clear-cut game where Magnus is just going to slowly convert the position. Doubled pawns here in the center are very hard to deal with. And yeah, we get a takes. He's coming to attack the pawn. Who cares? Brings the knight in. Again, at this point, you could just trade. But Magnus decides to go for another check. Again, we're not questioning the GOAT here for real. He definitely knows more than I do. After the knight trade, we see the knight back. Now, it is important to note that Christopher did not take the knight back here because that would double his pawns, and instead opted to take the more powerful and, especially in this position, like, look at the scope of this bishop. It was attacking this weak pawn. It was defending this kind of pawn structure over here. It was lasering down the king. Definitely the best decision to come back and attack that knight and take the bishop. Magnus does come back and defend himself, and we just get another quick attack followed by a defense of the knight. Now Christopher's trying to create a little bit of counterplay by pushing it down to the center of the board. Magnus's king is still at the center, but really it doesn't matter. You don't have any checks incoming. So like I said, it's just going to be a very tough game for Christopher to even try to claw back from or produce a draw from. And Magnus just makes a nice little conversion, brings his knight back over to the center of the board, supported by this pawn. This pawn's never getting through. You'll often like to do this in your games as well, where you actually want to put your knight or another piece right in front of their passed pawn. It's a very common tactic. Where now this pawn is immobile and it can't move whatsoever. It can't be kicked by another pawn. There's nothing there supporting it. So he's just going to slowly work his opponent down at this point. And Magnus does exactly that, just kind of maneuvers his rooks around, continues to attack the pawn, and gets a nice rook trade, and again offers another rook trade, which is taken, followed by, again, just blocking that pawn's path. And now the game is just over. We get a couple, gobbles here and there, and that's the game, really. That's all she wrote. Magnus comes back to defend, and we get a resignation. Very clean game from Magnus. Very, very impressive. If we go look here at the accuracy rating, that was a 94.3% accuracy game from Magnus. Really nothing special when it's Magnus, because you'll see this every game he plays, but it is very cool nonetheless. All right, for our next game here, we're going to look at another very clean game of Magnus's. He opens with the Sicilian. Very, very normal position. Really nothing too special. We get pretty standard development moves here. Does trade off the dark squared bishop, as he does have a blockade of dark squared pawns here in the center of the board. So pretty natural move there, I would say. His opponent does bring in the knight to attack his queen. Again, pretty natural move. You can take here, but it's typically not recommended, as you're just giving your opponent a nice outpost for their bishop. So Magnus just moves the queen away, and again, we're just going to see some pretty normal moves here. His opponent does decide to try to break through best move on the B file, which Magnus just takes back, accepts that breaking open of the position here. Magnus then centralizes his rook, preparing to bring his knight into the game. He does indeed do that, brings his knight back into the game, attacking this here knight that has a very nasty outpost, hoping for a little trade action, bringing his queen back into the game as well. We do not get to see that. His opponent does create another nice little outpost here on the edge of the board. Kabir doesn't love it. I'm assuming that's just because his knight is missing some squares that he could typically see, but cannot because he's closer to the edge of the board, and it's not really in the center of the position. It's mostly just on the side here, and it's attacking pretty unimportant squares. I mean, it is taking care of d5 and d7, so that is very nice. Even these back rank squares, but like, you know, like these squares aren't too needed to defend, and it's just kind of a weak knight, I would say. Magnus responds by kicking open the center of the board, does not even care that his opponent's knight is now guarding that square. And after a couple trades, we are actually quite into the middle of the game here. Everything's coming off the board, really. It's hard to tell you why they decide to trade in these exact orders, but they are taking in the best moves, and it is important to note that he does take this knight here instead of taking back the bishop, which actually takes the knight and double threatens the bishop. So when he takes back the rook, you can just take the bishop. So after the take back of the knight, his opponent does just move back the bishop, defending it and preparing to restructure his pawn so he doesn't have two different isolated pawns. Magnus, of course, does not help him out, brings his queen into the center of the board, preventing the pawn push, and preparing to do something like centralize more of his rooks and begin adding slow pressure and exuding some pressure on the opponent's position, trying to pick up one of these pawns. Still a very difficult game to win from. His opponent's just, you know, they're shuffling around pieces. Best move, again, get in, start to attack this central pieces that his opponent has. It's really all that his opponent has going for him. He's staying on the diagonal, protecting his knight. And in one move, his opponent makes the first blunder of the game, the really only mistake, and Magnus capitalizes, immediately sacrificing his knight for a simple conversion here. He sacrifices the knight, take the rook, and take the rook again, forcing his king up. And from this position, it's very clean. His opponent has two isolated pawns and a bishop for his connected pawns and a rook. So it is going to just be a pretty simple conversion at their level. And after the queen back, his opponent simply resigns. As you guys can see, Magnus Carlson operates on a completely different level than everybody else. That is what we do on this channel, after all. We just glaze Magnus. Really, it's just very instructive, very crazy to see the type of games that these grandmasters can pull out and how simple Magnus makes it look to just beat these guys. That last game we played there, he was at 99 point something % accuracy. Insanity. It's crazy. With that being said, if you want to get better at chess, make sure to check out my brand new chess book, How to LARP at Chess for Beginners. Thank you so much for joining me. Get out of here.